The first thing you felt was the floor, not the concrete under your shoes, not the steps beneath your knees, but the floor of Wembley Stadium itself, vibrating as if it had a heartbeat and 65,000 lungs. It shivered through railings and climbed through bones. It lived in the souls of every person standing there, and in the metal of the barriers, and in the scaffolding that held up the lights like a crown of stars above the stage. And then you heard it, the bass line, not recorded, not safe, alive, fat and rubber band taut, thumping like a pulse in the throat. Billie Jean. The scream that followed was not a single note, but a weather system. It rolled from the high cheap seats down to the pitching waves, collided against the stage, and sprang upward again as a spray of noise glittered with flashes. Cameras popped like constellations. The smell of pyrotechnics, of hot metal and summer night, of rain that hadn't fallen yet, and canned beer and perfume and bodies, all of it became one thing, one breath. The stadium leaned forward, and in the core of it, Michael Jackson rose out of the floor like a secret being told. White light caught the sequins of his jacket and shattered them into 1,000 splinters, scattering over the front rows. He tilted his fedora, dropped the brim low, and stood for a heartbeat without moving at all. The moment was a glass bell, soundless, suspended, and then he snapped, glove like lightning, and the bell shattered into rhythm. She was more like a beauty queen from a movie scene. The band locked into a groove so tight it felt preordained. The drummer ghosted the snare like a whisper. The guitarist flicked bright pinpricks of sound. The keys sighed silk. Michael's voice slipped out, bright as cut glass, soft as a prayer. People pressed their palms to their cheeks. People climbed on seats. People would later swear they didn't cry, cried. From the shadowed tunnel behind the stage, a pair of sound engineers leaned into a console bristling with faders and LEDs. "He's hot in the wedges," one muttered. The other adjusted by a hair. The front of house mix breathed, opened. The stadium swallowed the voice and gave it back gold. Up in the special access section, row 3 from the barricade, a man with construction workers' hands shifted his weight to keep from trembling. He was not watching the stage. He was watching his daughter. Emma Rodriguez, 9 years old, wore a shirt 2 sizes too big, the one with the printed sequin glove, and a scarf the color of sunrise tied over the soft, perfect roundness of her bald head. There was a tiny pale tape beneath her nose where an oxygen line sometimes lived. Tonight her mother had left it off, tucked safely inside a small bag, praying she wouldn't need it for just these few hours. Emma's eyes were cinema screens. Everything that landed in them became bigger than life. Her mother, Maria, had one hand at the base of Emma's skull, as if her fingertips could hold her daughter inside her body by touch alone. Every few minutes Maria's thumb found the pulse in the delicate neck, counting without looking like a woman kneading bread by memory. Carlos, standing behind them, had braced his hips against the rail. His chest rose and fell exactly like the kick drum. "Look, Papa," Emma breathed, the breath thin as tissue paper and full of sunlight. "He's really here." Carlos's mouth opened and closed once before the word came. "See." On stage, Michael slid backward. The moonwalk looked impossible even from 20 feet away. From anywhere else in Wembley, it looked like the stage itself had decided to move and take him with it, a tide receding, a trick of the earth. Every time he did it, the scream returned, a ring of white fire. "God," said a woman near the barricade, not blaspheming but pledging. She laughed and sobbed at once, hand over her mouth. Michael was in the pocket, that place beyond choreography, where time cooperates. His hat angled, his shoulder hung loose and old Hollywood. He didn't dance like a man so much as a rumor, glimpsed, glittering, gone and then there again. He sang with his eyes half closed like a man tasting rain. He spun, stopped on a dime, pointed. "Billie Jean is not my lover." The crowd shouted it back as if it were a creed. Behind him, the wall of lights blinked like a living machine. The camera crane swept the pit. Faces rose to meet it, desperate and delighted, hoping to be a molecule in the broadcast of a night they already understood was the best of their life. Emma squeezed her mother's fingers. "He can see me," she whispered. "He can feel you," Maria said, and tasted salt. In the control booth high up under the roof, a director's voice chattered into headsets. Camera 3, Find Me Tears. Camera 1, Keep him clean, keep him center. We'll take crowd wide on the kick. And then something beneath the choreography, beneath the plan and the machines and the math of the show, shifted by the thickness of a breath. A sound. It came from the special access section like a candle in wind, so small at first that the mix didn't catch it. Then it rose again, sharper, shaped by desperation, and only partly by the mouth making it. Michael. He didn't hear it. He spun. He dipped a shoulder. He leaned into the mic, a half smile riding the corner of his mouth, eyes glittering. The beat stepped forward. Please. The second syllable threaded space between snare and bass. It was the kind of sound that parts flocks of birds, the kind that a mother's body makes without asking permission from her throat. Maria's voice fractured on the air. There was no plan in it, only a breaking open. Carlos's hand reached her elbow and didn't pull her down. He didn't tell her to sit. He didn't say wait until the song is done. He had learned the shape of this kind of moment in the years that had no mornings, only fluorescent light. Emma turned her face to the stage and away from the tubes and needles and the gentle lies grown-ups tell to keep the sky from falling. "Mama," she said, surprised at her own tears. "Don't cry." "I'm not crying," Maria said, and laughed a laugh that was made of broken glass and love. On stage, Michael hit the lean body at an angle physics should not permit, and the stadium exploded again, obedient to a reflex. But he felt something under the noise. Something not wrong and not right. Exactly something else. A thrum that was not in his monitors. He straightened too fast, a half beat early. The band watched like wolves watch a pack leader. Muscles tense, eyes ready to match his next move. The voice came a third time, and this time it found the crack between the bass notes and went through. "Michael, please." "My daughter." His heel, perfectly placed for the next slide, hung an inch too long above the stage before coming down. The break was nothing, a hiccup, and yet the crowd closest to him felt the air pull back. Curious. Michael's head lifted like a deer scenting smoke. He did not stop. The band did not stop. The show was a body of its own, galloping, but a thin wire had been pulled through the fabric of it. The sound engineer at stage left flinched, scanning meters. Nothing red, nothing peaking. He lifted his eyes and found Michael's face, saw how the line of it shifted. The mother's voice came again, higher, merciless to her throat in the night, and the rules of concerts and how we behave when we have time. "She's dying." The syllables, 3 hard stones, skipped across the crowd and smacked against the stage. Michael's body answered before his mind did. The small muscles of his jaw tightened. His hand paused on the offbeat. He turned 3 centimeters toward the sound and then, against the requirements of the moment, away from his mark. He did not break character. He broke the idea that the character mattered more than the people in front of him. He let the chorus fly and didn't touch it. He slid backward, eyes unfocused, hearing now with a different instrument, some inner ear that had nothing to do with speakers or monitors or wedges. He was not listening for pitch. He was looking for pain. Maria climbed the seat, the one rule she had ever broken in public. She held Emma under the knees and behind the shoulder blades the way you carry a baby and a queen. Emma was light as laundry. Her cheek lay against Maria's collarbone, and the heat there made a crescent of sweat in the neckline of Maria's dress. Carlos steadied them both with hands that could lift rebar and now shook. A steward half reached to tell her to sit, then saw the scarf, the pale face, the small chest working, the glitter of the printed glove, and he stepped back. He stepped back as if God had put a hand on his sternum. "Michael." Maria's voice tore. "Please. She loves you." Michael moved to the edge of the stage without remembering deciding to. The choreography hit a wall, slid down it. He lifted his left hand, gloved, palm open, hold. The signal the band reads even if their eyes are closed. Sugarfoot counted 1 more bar and let the beat taper, not a cut, but a breath becoming a sigh. The guitar laid down its last shimmering slice. The keys let the chord ring and die. The bass curled into itself like a cat. Silence, not silence. The kind of not silence that glows, that hums in bones and metal, that opens the lungs of a building and lets them take a real breath. Michael's first words hung small against the scale of the place and were amplified until they filled it. Turn the lights up. He said it not like a man giving an order, but a man trying very hard to see. The first bank of house lights lifted. The upper deck came into soft focus, pale faces blinking like moons. Another bank rose, and then another. Wembley emerged, revealed to itself. The flags, the drink stands closed against the noise, the boys in replica jackets, the girls with glitter tears, the tired security guards leaning on their feet. "Higher," Michael said. "Please." The lights went brighter, bleaching the night out of the air. Shadows fled to the corners. Far at the back, a man with a broom paused and squinted toward the stage. Michael shaded his eyes with the flat of his hand. Glove, throwing a hard starburst. "Where?" He turned his head left to right, deliberate, as if giving time a chance to tell him. He'd been on this stage 1,000 times, in 1,000 places. He'd learned how to be alone in a roar. But there's silences you don't get to rehearse. "Where is she?" he asked, to no one and everyone. In the special access section, Maria's mouth opened and no sound came. Then sound returned like a wave, smashing glass. "Here." Her throat rasped. "Here. This is my daughter, Emma." The name struck the air and stayed. It repeated itself on the big screens, Emma, without appearing, because the crowd said it in whispers. Emma, 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 like a rosary bead pressed between fingers. Michael's gaze slid across faces that were one face, and then it stopped. He saw the scarf first, the bright thread of it. Then he saw the glove on the shirt and the small hand clutching at fabric with the helpless grip of tired children. Then he saw the curve of a cheek, the milk-pale color that belongs to the very young and the very sick. And then he saw eyes. She was smiling at him. It broke him, not in the way that ends a thing, in the way that opens it to the air so it can breathe. He stepped closer to the lip of the stage, the notch where the monitors crouched like sleeping animals. The cameras, obeying instinct, brought him to the screen's enormous and vulnerable, eyelashes jeweled with sweat. A second feed found Maria's face wrecked by love, and Emma's face lifted. Michael swallowed once, an almost audible click through the sound system. He lowered the mic toward his chest and spoke to the air, and then let the microphone take it away. "What did you say?" Maria blinked against light clean as noon. Her body leaned forward, as if trying to get closer to the man who was already as close as physics allowed. Her words broke and reformed. "She's 9. The number came out like a confession. "She's sick. The sentence fled. She grabbed it by the tail. "She loves you. She wanted just to show you." Emma licked her lips, small pink dart, and set into the places microphones find by accident. "Hi." The sound traveled through cables and processors, and across a field of cellophane wrappers and trampled programs. A small hive from a small person flew into the kind of place entirely too big for small things, and did not disappear. Michael's eyes closed and opened. He smiled with his mouth and not his face, and then with both. "Hi, Emma," he said. The crowd made a noise nobody recognized. Some reached for strangers' hands. Some were perfectly still because stillness was the only way to hold a thing that trembles. Behind Michael, at the edges of the stage, dancers stood in tableau, a freeze frame of weaponized beauty suddenly unclipped. One of them wiped under his eye with his wrist and pretended it was sweat. The keyboard player stared down at his hands, ringed by the faintest tremor. Michael turned his head 1 inch toward stage left. The head of security, broad-shouldered, headset corkscrewing down his neck, lifted his chin. "Give me a minute," Michael said into the mic, and the entire night bent to make space for that minute. He looked back at Emma as if to apologize for having to breathe in between looking at her. "I hear you," he said. "I hear you." Her smile widened because she believed him. Maria tried to say thank you. What came out was all the years and the fear and the hope and the heavy, bright love of a mother. It came out as air and water and didn't need words. Michael lifted his gloved hand again, softer than a conductor, and without turning around said, "Hold." The band, obedient to something older than rehearsal, stayed very still. A roadie at the wings paused in a half-crouch with a coil of cable. A camera swung down and stopped 2 meters from the family, polite as a guest. Michael set his feet, and leaned toward the edge of the stage as if the world were graded and he meant to slide down into the people. He extended his free hand palm up, a gesture from a painting, a gesture from a story about kings and bridges. "Keep the lights up," he said. "All the way." There was no music. There was no plan. There was breath in a glove and a mother's hands and a child in a shirt with a picture of a glove on it. There was a stadium's worth of electricity, tamed and waiting. Michael's voice came one more time, steady now, threaded with something so simple it made the air gentler around the words. "I need to see her." And the lights, obedient, bright, merciless, holy, rose until every face in Wembley could see every other face, and the night became a room where one man and one child could find each other without noise. The show was not over, but for the first time since the first note, the music had stopped so that something larger than music could walk in. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The rain had started again in Madrid, the soft, reluctant kind that paints hospital windows silver and makes the fluorescent lights inside look colder. In room 417 of San Marcos Children's Hospital, Emma Rodriguez lay surrounded by the faint hum of machines and the careful stillness of her mother. Maria sat beside the bed, fingers folded around a paper cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. Every few minutes she looked up at the digital clock above the door. Though she wasn't waiting for a doctor or a nurse, she was waiting for courage. Across from her, a small radio on the counter played Smooth Criminal at a whisper. Even through static, Michael Jackson's voice found the corners of the room. Emma's eyelids fluttered. "He sounds like light," she murmured. Maria smiled. "He is light, Carino." Emma's hair was gone now, her skin translucent. But when she smiled, it was like someone had drawn a curtain and let the sun back in. "When I go to heaven," she said, "you think he'll still be singing there?" The question cracked something deep inside Maria's ribs. She placed her cup down carefully, afraid it might break with her. "Don't talk about heaven," she whispered, brushing her daughter's cheek. "You're still here." But the girl's eyes were elsewhere. "I want to see him before I go. I want to show him my moonwalk." The words hung in the air, simple, impossible, beautiful. 2 floors down, Carlos Rodriguez argued softly with a nurse at the reception desk. He wasn't angry. He was pleading. His palms were open, the same palms that once carried bricks and wet cement, now carrying nothing but hope. "Please," he said, voice rough. "There must be some way. I need tickets for the concert in London." The nurse blinked. "Senor, you're in a hospital, not a travel agency." He smiled, defeated. "I know. I just thought maybe someone might know someone." Later that night, in the hospital cafeteria, he unfolded his old Nokia phone and began dialing numbers he hadn't called in years. Friends from construction sites, cousins who worked at the embassy, anyone who might help. The responses were kind but useless. Sold out. Too late. Impossible. But Carlos had spent his life building things that didn't exist until he made them exist. He wasn't about to stop now. By dawn, Maria found him sitting beside Emma's bed, hands clasped around a folded piece of paper. "What's that?" she asked. He grinned like a man who'd seen a miracle in the classifieds. "A contact. Spanish embassy in London. A friend of a friend. They said they'd try." Maria wanted to believe him, but after months of hospitals and bills and diagnoses, belief had become heavy to carry. She took his hand anyway. "Try," she whispered. For 2 days he tried. He called during lunch breaks, called after midnight, wrote emails on borrowed computers. He told the embassy staff the truth, not about himself, but about his daughter who still practiced moonwalks between chemo sessions. On the 3rd day, a young woman named Isabel called back. Her voice carried the careful tone of someone afraid to offer hope too soon. "Senor Rodriguez, there may be something. They're not backstage passes, but special access, close to the stage. 2 seats. Carlos closed his eyes. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." When he told Emma, she cried, real tears, not from pain but from the shock of joy. "Mama, Papa, we're really going?" Maria knelt beside her. "Yes, baby, you're going to see him." "Then I need my glove," Emma said seriously, "and the hat, and my shoes." Her father laughed through his tears. You'll have them all. That night, the hospital room transformed into a backstage dressing room. Nurses peeked in, smiling as Maria packed a small bag, oxygen tank, medication, extra scarf, the silver thread bracelet Emma had made in art therapy class. By morning, the rain had stopped. At the airport, the smell of fuel and coffee mingled in the air. Maria clutched Emma's passport, so tightly her knuckles whitened. The flight attendant saw the fatigue in her eyes and moved them quietly to the front of the boarding line. Emma wore her Michael Jackson shirt and a bright pink jacket to keep warm. On her wrist was a hospital bracelet they hadn't dared to remove, and on her face was a kind of smile that made strangers turn and soften. On the plane, she pressed her forehead to the window as the engines roared. It's like music, she said. Carlos kissed the top of her head. Everything is music if you listen hard enough. As the plane lifted to the clouds, Maria held her daughter's hand and whispered a prayer, so quietly no one but God could hear it. Please let her make it through the concert. Cut to backstage, Wembley Stadium, London. It was 2 p.m. on July 16th, 1988, and backstage at Wembley was a world of rhythm even before the music started. Technicians hauled cables the thickness of a child's arm. The scent of ozone and fresh paint filled the air. Every surface hummed. In a private dressing room behind the stage, Michael Jackson sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, headphones covering his ears. He wasn't listening to his own songs. He rarely did before a show. Instead, he listened to the sound of rain recorded from the window of his hotel earlier that morning. He breathed in time with it. In 2, 3, 4. Out 2, 3, 4. Michael, 5 minutes, said Bill Bray, his head of security, peeking in. Michael opened his eyes. Thank you, Bill. He rose in one smooth motion. Every movement was quiet, deliberate, as if rehearsed with the air. On the vanity beside him, a single white glove lay next to a photo of his mother and a small silver cross. He slipped on the glove, flexed his fingers, and looked at himself in the mirror. For a moment, he didn't see the king of pop or the performer about to make 65,000 people lose their minds. He saw a boy from Gary, Indiana, who used to sing on tiny stages and dream of lights he couldn't yet name. Something in his chest tightened. He rubbed the back of his neck. Bill watched him from the door. You okay, Mike? Michael nodded slowly. Yeah, I don't know. Feels different tonight. Bill smiled. Different good. Michael tilted his head, as if listening to something only he could hear. Different important. At sound check earlier that afternoon, the crew had joked that Michael was unusually quiet. Normally he teased them, through quick jokes, danced even when the stadium was empty. But that day he had walked the edge of the stage several times, looking out at the thousands of empty seats, tapping the mic stand like a heartbeat. What are you doing? One of the guitarists asked. Listening, Michael said, every crowd has a sound before it makes a sound. I want to hear it. He'd smiled, but it hadn't been a performer's smile. It had been the kind that belongs to someone waiting for something they can't name. At 7 p.m., the gates opened. The roar was immediate. Waves of footsteps, laughter, chants of Michael, that seemed to lift the sky itself. Backstage, Michael could hear them through the concrete. He paced the hallway, snapping his fingers in rhythm with the crowd's pulse. Karen Fay, his makeup artist, watched from the doorway. You got that look again, she said gently. What look? The one that means you're about to make everyone cry. He laughed softly. Maybe they'll make me cry. Meanwhile, across the city, a taxi rolled through the streets toward Wembley. The Rodriguez family sat pressed together in the back seat. Emma stared out the window as London passed in flashes of light and color. Double-decker buses, glowing shop windows, people waving MJ signs from bridges. Look, Mama, she said, pointing. He's everywhere. Maria smiled weakly. He's a big deal here. Bigger than heaven, Emma said simply. When the cab turned onto Wembley Way, the noise hit them, a living thunder, echoing between the concrete walls. Carlos's hands tightened on his knees. Maria felt her chest expand with both fear and gratitude. As they stepped out of the taxi, the crowd swallowed them whole. Fans wore jackets embroidered with sequins, hats tilted at the same angle as Michael's. Vendors shouted over the hum. The air smelled of popcorn and sweat and history. Emma clutched her mother's hand. "Are we late?" "Not yet." Security guards waved them toward the special access line. The passes from the embassy glittered under the floodlights as though blessed. When they reached their seats, row 3, section C, the stage seemed close enough to touch. The monitors towered like black monoliths, and the sea of people around them shimmered with anticipation. Emma leaned against her father's chest. "I can hear his heartbeat," she whispered. Carlo smiled. "Maybe that's your heartbeat, Nina." She shook her head. "No, his." Backstage had its own weather. Heat gathered in the corridors, where dimmer racks breathed out metallic warmth. A low wind seemed to move through the truss as riggers made last-minute checks, their harnesses clinking like tiny bells. Fluorescents hummed above gray paint. A golf cart whirred past, stacked with towels and water. Radios crackled. "Copy that. 10 minutes to house. Stand by Pyro 1. In the smallest room off the main tunnel," a kettle whispered. Karen Faye blew across a paper cup and watched steam ghost away in the air. "You want a sip?" she asked, holding it out. Michael shook his head. He was rolling his ankles, loosening each joint with the quiet concentration of a calligrapher. His jacket, white sequins throwing prismatic flecks on the wall, hung open. His breathing stayed low in the belly. He wasn't saving energy. He was collecting it, letting it pool where he would need it most. Bill Bray tapped his watch. 7 minutes. Michael nodded, eyes distant. House front of house. Packed. They're already singing the set list. Michael smiled. It moved through him like a small tide. He stepped closer to the mirror, studied the man the way a pilot studies the sky. Gloves flexed, shoulders settled. He hummed a single tone and let it ring in the skull until the bones answered back. "Different tonight," he said again, not quite to anyone. Karen set the tea down. "Different how?" Michael pinched the bridge of his nose, a boyish gesture. "Like the crowd has a story," he said, searching the room for language. "Sometimes you can hear it before they tell it to you." He shrugged, the sequin sighing. "Feels like I'm supposed to listen." Bill's radio crackled. "House lights to half. Cue tunnel cam." He put a big hand on Michael's shoulder. "We'll be right there with you." "I know." Michael patted his hand once, grateful and already elsewhere. He crossed to a battered flight case wired into a portable cassette deck. The label on the case, in thick black marker, read Sounds. He pressed play. Not music. Ocean. A soft wash, distant gulls. He closed his eyes and let the sound rinse his chest clean. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." He turned the deck off, set the tape back gently, picked up the single glove, slid it on like a cathedral glove with care. The fabric kissed his palm. The rhinestones caught the light. Stars called to daylight. 2 minutes, Bill said. "Thank you." The hallway to stage right was a throat of concrete and cabling. Dancers lined up on their marks, stretching calves, shaking arms loose, clapping each other's backs. The guitarist clicked his wireless pack and ran a half-muty chord. It hung in the air like neon. A lighting tech trotted past with a wrench in his back pocket and a grin he couldn't hide. "Y'all hear them?" one of the backing vocalists whispered, tilting her head up. Through the concrete, through the scaffolding, another reality pressed in. 65,000 voices chanting Michael, Michael, Michael. It sounded like surf hitting a cliff. He breathed it in, then stepped onto the rolling lift that would bring him up to the stage for the opener. He always felt a split second of childhood just then. The carnival wheel, the smell of metal warmed by sun. He tucked his chin, bent his knees. "Remember," Karen murmured from the edge, touching his elbow, "you're not alone up there." He glanced at her, eyes full of something nearly shy. "I know," he said. "I never am." A stagehand counted him down on fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2. Darkness above. Heat all around. A prayer threaded the space between ribs. The lift rose. House lights died like a held breath. A single synth pad, a luminous, slow inhale, filled Wembley. Then the opening hits, the hard white strobes, the sudden detonation of light. The stage arrived like a morning. The screen showed silhouette first, and then the man, and the stadium came apart at the seams. Michael stepped into it, as if stepping into rain he had wanted all day. He let the first ovation wash past without catching it. He stood still and gave the crowd a full measure of stillness, a discipline few performers trust. The stillness tells them, we have time. When he finally tipped the brim of his hat, he felt the city tilt toward him. Good evening. He breathed into the mic. It came back as thunder. He moved. The show gathered momentum the way a body does shaking off sleep. Wannabe starting something, found its grin. Smooth criminal tightened into its crime. He teased the front rows with a forward lean, released them laughing, left sweat angel prints in the shape of a man devout to rhythm. Between numbers, he glanced at the wings. Bill's hand gesture, flat, sweeping, meant all clear. The crew grinned at each other like kids who'd snuck into fair and found the keys to every ride. But underneath the precision, he kept feeling for that other thing, that low hum under the crowd's monsoon. He never said out loud the word he had for it. Calling. It sounded too big, too church. But that's what it was. Sometimes it was one person, sometimes a row, sometimes the whole building, sometimes no one, and that was a relief and a sadness at once. Tonight, it tugged like a kite string in his palm. Between Beat It and Rock With You, he drifted to stage left, eyes grazing the special access pens. Security there was doubled and gentle, the way it always was around wheelchairs and canes and parents with too much in their faces to be just about music. A girl on a man's shoulders flashed a handmade sign. I named my kitten Billie Jean. He laughed into his shoulder, charmed. A boy in a red jacket did a creditable spin, fell on his butt, popped up triumphant. Michael pointed at him and applauded, and the boy folded with joy. But the tug didn't come from the fun. He felt it again during the vamp before Rock With You. A vampire of a thought, no pain, just insistence. Bit at his awareness. Look closer. He raised the mic, gave the count, and slid into the soft honey of the verse. His voice found the slipstream. The band cradled it there. The stadium glowed warm, a living lantern. Backstage left. Karen watched him and saw the little muscle in his jaw working. He's fishing, she said to no one. The monitor engineer nodded. Fingers on faders, eyes tracking Michael's gaze rather than his meters. In the special access pen, 3 rows from the barrier, Maria pressed her palm to Emma's back and felt the fluttering wing of her heart. Carlos had memorized the exits and the nearest medic and the route back to the car. He was the kind of man who always had a plan until he didn't, and then he had prayer. Emma swayed to Rock With You, as if someone had set her on a slow tide. When the chorus came, she lifted her hands, not high, air was currency, and let the lights pool in her palms. Papa, she whispered, breath barely lifting her words. If I show him the moonwalk from here, do you think he'll know? Carlos swallowed around a stone. He knows everything, he said, and kissed the top of her head. Michael finished the tune with falsetto that skimmed the roof like a swallow and turned away before the applause had finished falling. He ran a hand under the collar of his jacket, felt sweat cool in air that smelled like wires and joy. He signaled water. A runner darted out, low, swift, like wildlife crossing a road, and placed a bottle where his hand would be. He drank, the kind of lonely drink athletes know. House is hot, Sugarfoot murmured from behind his kit. Sticks twirling. You're hotter. Michael smiled without looking. Let's make them sing. For a heartbeat, the world stopped moving. The music still whispered faintly from the monitors, the bass line looping on instinct while the band waited for the signal that never came. The great engine of Wembley Stadium. 65,000 bodies breathing, stomping, shouting, stalled into something fragile. Michael Jackson stood in the middle of the stage, his body a silhouette against a field of white light, one hand raised in quiet command. Bring the lights up, he said again, softer now. The floodlights obeyed. Beams swept across the front rows in searching arcs, scattering over sequin hats, homemade banners, tears. The cameras pivoted wildly, unsure whether this was part of the show or the end of it. The screens magnified his face. Focused, listening, the calm before an unimaginable storm. And then, through the glare, Michael saw her. A man's arms held the small shape of a child, too thin, too pale, wrapped in a bright pink jacket that looked impossibly brave against her frail frame. Her mother's hand trembled against the child's shoulder. And though the lights burned, the girl's face shone brighter, eyes wide open, smiling at the stage with a kind of peace that didn't belong to this world. Maria's voice rose again, smaller now but still reaching him. "Please, Michael, she's dying." The words didn't echo. They sank, heavy and honest, into the silence that followed. Michael's chest tightened. Around him, the band shifted uneasily, waiting. Security leaned forward, unsure whether to intervene or hold still. He lowered the microphone. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl tilted her head back, her tiny voice carried by some mercy through the noise. "Emma." Michael nodded slowly, pressing his hand over his heart. "Emma." He turned to the crowd, eyes bright but steady. "Everybody say hello to Emma." The response rolled to the stadium like a prayer. "Hello, Emma." Tens of thousands of voices, rough and broken, calling her name. Maria's knees gave out. Carlos caught her, shaking and speechless. Michael took a breath, stepped forward to the edge of the stage, and gestured for his crew. Bill Bray was already moving, headset pressed tight to his ear. "Get them up here," Michael said quietly. "Now, please." Backstage chaos turned into choreography. 2 security guards reached the barrier within seconds, clearing a narrow path. The sea of fans parted, silent but electric. Every camera in the venue tilted to follow. The screens went wide. Mother, father, child, walking the crowd under the lights, escorted by men in black shirts who suddenly looked like angels. Michael waited. He didn't pace, didn't move. He stood perfectly still, head bowed, one hand at his chest. For once, the performer was gone. The man remained. When the guards guided him up the ramp, Michael stepped forward and met them halfway. The sight broke the room in two, one half awe, the other tears. Maria's face was streaked with salt and fear, but Emma was smiling, her small fingers gripping the sequined sleeve of her hero, as if holding on to a dream that might vanish if she blinked. Michael bent slightly, lowering himself to her height. "You made it, Emma," he said softly. "You came to dance." She nodded, shy but certain. "I practice." He laughed, a quiet, beautiful sound that filled the microphone without any music behind it. "Then let's show them." The audience held its breath as Michael placed her gently on her feet beside him. His hand hovered behind her back, a silent promise that she wouldn't fall. The music started again, slower this time. The Billie Jean beat softened into a lullaby. The bass thumped like a heartbeat. The lights dimmed to a single warm glow around them. Emma's feet moved first. Small, shaky steps backward, the faintest ghost of a moonwalk. The crowd gasped, then cheered softly, a wave of tenderness instead of noise. Michael followed, mirroring her motion, his body bending to her rhythm instead of the other way around. He mouthed the count for her, 1, 2, 3, and together they slid across the stage. A single teardrop fell from Maria's chin. Carlos held her close, both of them caught between disbelief and gratitude. Emma finished her tiny dance and turned toward Michael, laughing breathlessly. "Did I do it right?" He knelt, microphone forgotten, hands on her shoulders. "You did it perfectly." Then he looked out at the crowd, eyes shining under the lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, this is what bravery looks like." The applause that followed wasn't the usual roar. It was a cathedral rising from human sound. People hugged strangers. Men wept. The sound was love made audible. When the song ended, Michael stayed on his knees beside her. The lights dimmed to gold. He whispered something in Emma's ear. No one could hear it, not even her parents. She nodded once, still smiling, and reached into her pocket. The camera zoomed in as she pulled out a small bracelet made of colored thread and tied it around his wrist. "So, you remember me when I'm in heaven." Michael's head bowed. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. He lifted the microphone once more and said, "You've made this the most special show of my life, Emma." The crowd rose in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Cameras shook from the vibration of hands clapping, people sobbing, flashes firing like lightning. It was no longer a concert. It was communion. When Emma was carried back to her parents, Michael watched her go until the crowd swallowed them again. The music resumed eventually, because it had to, but his voice sounded different, softer, sacred. Every lyric that night, every note belonged to her. Somewhere in the stands, Maria whispered to her husband, "She's smiling." And for the first time in months, Carlos laughed. "She's more than smiling, Maria. She's alive." That night would become legend, the moment when fame stepped aside and humanity took its place. It was a night when Michael Jackson stopped the greatest show on earth to remind everyone what music was for. The thunder of applause still lingered, but in Michael it sounded far away, like a storm retreating behind mountains. The lights were still dazzling, the smoke still curling around his ankles, but the world felt quieter than it ever had inside a stadium of 65,000 people. He stood at center stage, breathing hard, the bracelet tiny and bright around his wrist. Emma's bracelet. The colored threads glimmered in the white beams like a living thing. He looked down at it for a long moment, his chest rising and falling, the sequins on his jacket catching tears he hadn't realized had fallen. "Thank you," he whispered, not into the microphone, not to the crowd, but to the universe. When he finally turned toward the wings, the crew parted instinctively. Cameras still rolled, unsure if the concert was over, unwilling to miss whatever came next. Michael walked slowly, head bowed, one hand brushing the air as if steadying himself in invisible water. Backstage, the noise hit him differently. Muffled chaos, quick footsteps, the smell of sweat, power cables, adrenaline. People were crying. Grown men, stagehand hardened by years on the road, wiping their faces with the backs of their hands. Someone murmured, "I've never seen anything like that." Someone else said, "She looked like she was glowing." Bill Bray met him halfway down the corridor. "They're in the green room, Mike, the little girl and her parents." Michael nodded once, silent. The long hallway stretched ahead like a dream. Each fluorescent light above him flickered as he passed, humming in rhythm with the fading roar of the crowd outside. His footsteps made no sound on the thick carpet, yet each one seemed to echo inside his chest. He stopped just before the door. A security guard opened it quietly, and the air changed. Inside, the Rodriguez family sat close together on the small sofa meant for record executives and VIP guests. Emma was lying across her mother's lap now, eyes half closed, exhausted but smiling. The pink jacket was wrinkled from being held so tightly. Carlos's hands were clasped, his knuckles white. Maria looked up the moment Michael entered, and for an instant, the world seemed to stop breathing again. She started to stand, but Michael shook his head gently. "Please," he said, "stay with her." He crouched beside them, the sequins of his jacket crackling softly. Up close, Emma looked impossibly small, her pulse flickering in the hollow of her throat like a hummingbird's wing. "Hey, little one," he said quietly, "you danced better than me tonight." Emma's eyes fluttered open. "No," she whispered, a tiny smile on her lips. "You're magic." Michael laughed softly. "You're the magic, Emma. You made everyone believe again." She looked at his wrist, saw the bracelet, and reached out with trembling fingers to touch it. "You kept it." "I'll always keep it," he said. "It's my lucky charm now." Maria covered her mouth to keep from sobbing. Carlos blinked furiously, failing to hold back tears. "Thank you," Maria managed, "for everything, for stopping, for listening." Michael met her gaze and shook his head. "No, thank you for reminding me why I do this." He sat down on the floor beside them, cross-legged like a child, the stage dust still on his shoes. For a while, nobody spoke. The noise from outside, fans still singing Billie Jean, drifted faintly through the concrete walls. It sounded like the ocean again, distant and eternal. After a moment, Michael looked at Emma and said, "You gave all of them something tonight. You know that? You showed them what courage looks like." Emma's voice was barely audible. "I just wanted to dance." "And you did." He smiled. And when you did, you made me remember something. When I was little, I used to dream that maybe one song could make the whole world feel love at the same time. Tonight, you did that. Emma blinked slowly, as though memorizing every word. Then I did good. Michael nodded. You did perfect. She reached for his gloved hand, and he took it carefully, afraid he might hurt her. Her fingers were warm, feather-light. Can you sing one more song? She asked. He hesitated. What do you want to hear? Her lips curved. Man in the Mirror. Michael exhaled softly, then smiled. That's a good one. He looked around the room. A small keyboard sat in the corner. Someone from the crew must have left it there. He stood, walked over, and pressed one key. The note hung fragile and pure in the air. He played the opening chords, slower than usual, almost like a lullaby. I'm going to make a change. For once in my life, his voice filled the room. Not the stadium voice, not the rehearsed show voice, but the one that came from somewhere deeper. The family listened in silence, Maria holding Emma's hand, Carlos staring at the floor, shaking his head in disbelief. When Michael reached the chorus, he looked up, eyes glistening. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. Emma's lips moved with the words. She didn't have the strength to sing, but her eyes were shining. When the last note faded, the room stayed silent for a long time. Then Michael whispered, You made the world better tonight, Emma. Never forget that. Emma's eyelids fluttered closed. I won't. He touched her forehead gently, almost reverently, then stood and turned to her parents. You've got a beautiful daughter. Carlos swallowed hard. We know. She's got more fight than any army, Michael said. Maria's voice trembled. She wanted this more than anything. I didn't think it could happen. Michael smiled faintly. Sometimes impossible things are just waiting for us to notice them. He looked at Emma one more time, memorizing the way her small hand rested against her mother's arm, the way her chest rose and fell like the rhythm of a quiet song. Then he nodded to Bill, who had been standing silently by the door. Make sure they have whatever they need, Michael said softly. Hotel, car, doctors. Anything. Don't let them worry about a thing. Bill nodded, eyes shining. You got it, Mike. Back in his dressing room, the mirror stared at him like another person. He peeled off the jacket, the glove, the layers of stage makeup, until all that was left was a man in a plain white shirt with tear stains down his face. The friendship bracelet glowed against the simplicity of his wrist. He sat down, elbows on his knees, and finally let himself cry. Not loudly, not theatrically. Quiet tears that fell onto the floor like small drops of mercy. The sound of them hitting the tile was the only applause that mattered now. A knock at the door broke the silence. Karen's voice. You all right? He wiped his face quickly, though he didn't answer right away. Yeah, he said after a moment. Just thinking. She came in quietly. That was something else, Michael. The crew still in tears. He smiled weakly. She saved the show. Karen tilted her head. You saved her dream. He shook his head. Maybe it's the same thing. That night, long after everyone had gone, Michael stood alone on the empty stage. The seat stretched away into darkness. Just shadows and memory now. He walked to the exact spot where Emma had stood and placed his hand over his heart. He whispered, Thank you, again, to her, to the music, to the mystery that had brought them together. Then he looked down at the bracelet, feeling its small weight like a promise. The next morning, Michael canceled his scheduled interviews and press photos. Instead, he asked his driver to take him to St. Mary's Hospital, where the Rodriguez family had been transferred for observation. The staff didn't believe it at first. When the limousine pulled up the side entrance and Michael Jackson stepped out in a plain coat and surgical mask, the receptionist nearly fainted. He removed the mask and smiled gently. I'm here to see Emma Rodriguez. Within minutes, he was outside her room, through the glass. He saw her asleep, the oxygen tube tracing a pale line across her cheek. Maria sat beside her, reading from a small Bible. Carlos dozed in the corner. Michael knocked softly, then entered. Maria gasped, rising quickly. "Mr. Jackson." He lifted a hand. "Please call me Michael." She covered her mouth, tears already forming. "You came. I said I would." He moved to the bedside, careful not to wake Emma. For a long moment, he simply watched her breathe. The monitors blinked gently, keeping time like a metronome. "She looks peaceful," he said. Maria nodded. "She told me last night she wasn't afraid anymore." Michael closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, shining. "That's the greatest gift anyone could give me." When Emma stirred, her eyelids fluttering open, the first thing she saw was his face. Her lips curved. "You came back." "Of course I did," he said. "We still have songs to sing." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Mama said you're an angel." He smiled. "Your mama's half right, but tonight you're the angel." She reached out a weak hand toward his bracelet. "You still have it." "I told you, I'll wear it forever." He stayed for nearly an hour, telling her stories from the tour. Funny things that made her giggle, gentle memories that kept her awake with wonder. When the nurses came to adjust her for, he stepped back quietly, promising to return before his next flight. As he left the room, Maria touched his arm. "You gave her hope, Michael." He shook his head. "She gave me faith." That evening, back at his hotel, Michael sat by the window watching the London skyline fade into dusk. His reflection hovered faintly over the glass, superimposed on the city lights. The bracelet glimmered in the fading sun. He whispered to himself, "There's something more important than any show." And somewhere in a hospital room across the city, a little girl slept soundly, her dreams full of music. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the hotel armchair, the television turned down to a murmur, the bracelet pressed between his palms like a relic. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the way the lights had found her in that ocean of faces, the small hand trembling as it tied its promise around his wrist. He could still hear the first words she had said to him on stage. Magic. At dawn, he finally opened a balcony door. The city was gray and soft, early buses whispering through wet streets. He leaned on the rail and listened to London wake. The cool air stung his eyes, or maybe that was just memory. He whispered again, "Thank you, Emma," and it drifted into the fog. When the phone rang around 8, it wasn't his manager or press. It was the hospital. The doctor's voice was gentle, practice in mercy. "She's stable. Better than last night. Actually, her vitals are stronger." Michael exhaled so deeply his whole frame trembled. "Tell her I'll see her soon," he said. "You can tell her yourself," the doctor replied. "She won't stop talking about you." He laughed quietly, the sound half relief, half disbelief. That sounded like her. News of the moment had already escaped into the world. By mid-morning, every newspaper in London carried a photo of him kneeling beside Emma on the Wembley stage. The headlines ranged from King of Pop's kindness stops the show to the night the music cried. He didn't read any of them. He was packing. His team tried to argue. There were meetings, radio spots, interviews arranged weeks in advance, but he waved them off. "Cancel them," he said. "I've got somewhere more important to be." He arrived at the hospital, carrying a small box wrapped in silver paper. When he stepped through the door of room 12, Emma's face lit up so fast that even the machine seemed to blink brighter. "You came again." "Of course. I had to deliver something." He set the box on her lap. Inside lay one of his white gloves, smaller than the one he'd worn the night before, tailored for her tiny hand. The sequins winked in the sunlight. Emma gasped. "Is it really mine?" "All yours," he said. "Every star on it knows your name." She put on, flexed her fingers, and giggled. "Now I'm magic, too." He nodded, eyes shining. "You always were." The weeks that followed blurred into letters and phone calls. He phoned every few days, sometimes from hotels, sometimes from airports, always beginning the same way. "Hey, superstar, how are we feeling today?" She'd tell him about her treatments, her school friends who came to visit, the songs she sang to keep her strength up. He told her about the crowds, about the new dance step he couldn't quite get right, about the nights when the moon looked like the spotlight she'd danced under. One afternoon, he called from Los Angeles. "I'm writing something new," he said. It's about people who change the world just by showing it love. You inspired it. Emma giggled. Then it's our song. Exactly, he said. Months later, when the tour brought him back to Europe, he visited again. She was stronger, laughing more easily. They sat together in the garden behind the ward, feeding crumbs to pigeons that strutted near their shoes. Cameras clicked from far away, but he ignored them. Do you still dance? He asked. Only in my head, she said. But that's where the best dance is live. He smiled. Keep dancing there. I'll keep dancing out here. That way the world's covered. The first time he stepped onto a stage after the hospital call, the one that said she's free now, Michael felt the floor differently. Not as an engine or an altar, not as a springboard under 1,000,000 watts of light, but as a plain, mortal plank of wood where human feet touch down and choose what to do next. The bracelet nestled against the pulse in his wrist and warmed with the heat of his skin. He looked at it, then at the crowd he could not yet see, and whispered into the dark, For you? When the lights rose, every roar that came at him blurred at the edges. He moved and sang and turned on the diamond of his heel, and the choreography still fit him like a riverbed fits water. But there was a new step, a quiet one only the band knew, the pause. A full bar of stillness before the chorus of Man in the Mirror, a sliver of silence wide enough for a memory to cross the stage and sit beside him. He never said her name into the mic, because some names are too holy to feed to electricity. But when the hush arrived and he dropped his head, the front rows could feel that someone small and brave had walked into the spotlight with him. Backstage, he changed the run of show. He told the lighting director, Lose 2 strobe hits after the first chorus. I want to see faces. He told the camera crew, Stay off me when I talk to them. He told the band, If I stop, stop. If I listen, listen. The crew nodded and wrote notes, used to accommodation for theatrics, not for quiet. But then they watched the first time he did it. How the pause turned the entire arena into a heart that learned to beat gently. And they stopped calling it a cue. They started calling it a prayer. News had already given a night at Wembley 100 names. Magazines printed the photo where he's kneeling, his head bent to a girl in pink. Commentators argued about whether it was planned. Nothing planned glows like that. The bootlegs moved in hushed trades, grainy. Trembling tapes passed hand to hand at record fairs and in school cafeterias. People cried alone before their televisions, rewinding the moment where music unclenched its fists. He didn't talk about it on camera. If a journalist pushed, he'd smile and say, Sometimes the audience sings back. If they asked about the thread on his wrist, he'd turn his glove and let light find it. A friend, he'd say, and leave it there. But he'd changed. It started small. He asked that every venue special access section be moved a few feet closer, as close as you can make it without someone getting hurt. He told security to sweep the pens before doors for wheelchairs stuck on thresholds and for mothers whose hands were too full to carry signs. He began to scan during sound check, not for acoustics, but for gravity, the single seat that felt heavier than its neighbors, as if the universe had placed a stone there and was waiting to see who would notice. He spoke differently to the band. Rehearsals had always been a place where perfection was a form of love, where he asked for the 10th of a second that separates brilliance from memory. He still wanted it. He still needed the kick on the exact 16th where the body believes it can fly. But now, when a note rang true by accident, the bass player laughing on the downbeat, the guitarist hitting a sweet harmonic by mistake, he raised a hand and said, There, keep that. That's the part that's alive. He began to listen for the thread. At a show in Vienna, the thread was a boy whose white cane glowed like a baton in the camera flare. Michael stopped human nature between chorus and bridge, looked past the edge of the stage as if the air itself had just said his name, and invited the boy to feel the sequins on his sleeve. The boy's fingers moved over the glassy constellation like a cartographer mapping stars. The band stayed in a 2-chord cradle, while 50,000 people learned that touch is also music. In Paris, the thread was a woman in a headscarf who didn't cry when everyone around her did. She was too busy keeping the breath inside her small son steady. Michael sat on the stage lip and sang the second verse of Heal the World into only one mic, not the house, so that she and the boy were the only ones who heard it. The cameras filmed his back. The stadium watched the quiet and applauded something it hadn't seen. The crew adjusted without complaint. Stage managers built extra minutes into the running order and learned to read the angle of his chin, the way he'd plant his heel when the show had to become a room for a single person. "Stand by, pause," they'd whisper into their headsets. Lighting came to love it, because for that minute they got to paint the crowd's faces instead of a legend silhouette. Security learned a patience they had never needed in a riot. They became ushers to small miracles. The letters changed too. Bags of fan mail had always carried love in excess. Drawings, rings wrapped in tissue, essays about childhood saved by songs. Now the stacks grew heavier with hospital paper, with careful loops of handwriting from parents who sounded older on the page than they were in life. She watches your concerts from her bed and claps when you spin. He learned to count by the steps in your dance. "We don't know how long we have. We want to say thank you now." He read them. Not all. No man can hold that much hope without breaking, but enough to feel the chorus warming his ribs. On flights, he'd rest his forehead against the window and imagine the letters as tiny boats lighting a river he didn't know he was swimming in. He started to send boxes back, tore T-shirts with messages scrawled under the hem in Sharpie, Polaroids with his tongue out. Smile anyway. Cassettes with hand-labeled track lists so they'd know he'd actually touched them. Once, to a family in Naples, he mailed a fedora. The father wrote that their daughter wore to sleep, and the brim got bent. Michael laughed when he read that because anything that gets loved gets bent. He changed the rooms around him. He'd always been a kind employer, generous at Christmas, loyal, quick to forgive the error you paid for with embarrassment. Now he sat with truck drivers after loadout, asking about their kids. He told the caterers to send the untouched food to shelters and guessed correctly that the security guards would help carry it if you asked them like men and not like muscle. He was late to meetings because he was early to moments, and his managers groaned and grinned because the box office had never been healthier and none of their spreadsheets could explain why. He stopped making announcements. He started making calls. In Rome, he slipped out a side door with a small bouquet and a road manager who could keep a secret. They visited a ward where air smelled like antiseptic and braveness, where nurses had the soft hands of saints and the hard spines of people who win unwinnable wars daily. He shook hands with parents who looked at him with the gratitude you save for doctors and thunderstorms that pass your house by. He sang 8 bars of You Are Not Alone into a plastic mask. He wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist and left through the laundry bay so no one waiting out front would have to learn Fame was across town doing something they couldn't ticket. He wrote differently. Songs had always come to him like birds, landing on his shoulder until he could teach them to sit on the right branches. After Wembley, the birds were smaller and braver. He wrote a bridge that refused cymbals and demanded breath. He wrote a lyric that didn't sound like him until he sang it once and his throat discovered it had been waiting for the exact sentence. Sometimes the only spotlight a stage needs is the one it turns back on the world. He scratched the line out and wrote it again because the melody didn't care about aphorisms, but the truth of it embered in the corner of his mind and kept him warm when he doubted. He started a habit that became a ritual that became a promise. On show days, he walked the house with a flashlight and a hoodie before the doors opened. No entourage, just a man in the seats and the echo of yesterday in the catwalks. He'd leave a note taped under one chair chosen by coin flip. If you find this, the song is about you tonight. Love, M. Stagehands found a few and framed them. Most disappeared into pockets and lives. He liked that better. He phoned Maria. The first call after the funeral was clumsy. Both of them were taut threads. Neither wanted to be the bow that plucked the other into sound. "I'm sorry," he said, and startled himself with how inadequate the words were. He stopped. Every lovely word sounded stolen when applied to someone who had made a whole stadium gentle by standing up. "She taught me," he said instead. Maria exhaled the kind of breath you give to someone who remembered to say the one necessary thing. "She loved you." "I know." He touched the bracelet. "I won't forget." They spoke gently after that, not often, not ceremonially. On her birthday, he sent flowers that looked like sunrise. On the anniversary, he sent no flowers at all, because grief is not a holiday. And instead, he sent a note that said only, "I remember the pink jacket." She wrote back, I remember your knees. The foundation came not from a meeting, but from a hallway. He'd been walking between dressing rooms when he saw a flyer tacked to a corkboard, a local charity asking for volunteers to grant last wishes. A small photo of a boy in a baseball cap holding a paper star. He stood there long enough for the runner who'd posted the notice to return, stapler still in hand. What if, Michael asked, we made a place where those wishes could get to me faster? The runner blinked. Like an address? Like a bridge, Michael said. Lawyers were called, and miraculously they behaved. A name was chosen. Funds were seeded. Staff were hired who didn't mind that their first directive was answer the phone with kindness. The Emma Rodriguez Foundation didn't launch with a gala. It started with a letter from a girl in Lisbon who wanted to sing to her grandmother before the light. Went and with a man in Johannesburg who wanted his son to see the ocean just once. The first check was hand-delivered. The second came with a drawing of a glove. He didn't put his face on the website. He put his ear to the ground. The foundation bought train tickets, kept parents' jobs from falling through cracks, made doctors' appointments less terrifying by paying for taxis, so nobody had to navigate bus routes with chemo in their veins. Sometimes it arranged a backstage hug. Sometimes it bought pizzas for a ward and let the nurses pretend it was their idea. Always it wrote back. People keep hope alive when mail arrives. On stage, Billie Jean softened around the edges where the memory lived. The lean stayed audacious. Physics needs its miracles, but he came out of it less a daredevil than a man bowing to the laws of weight and grace. He added a new thing once that everybody copied badly on YouTube. He reached into the pit, not for a hat or a hand, but for a drawing. A crayon portrait of two stick figures moonwalking, one tall, one small, both smiling. He held it up to a stadium, and it looked exactly like a stained glass window in a cathedral no one had built, only discovered. There were nights he failed, nights when the thread tugged, and he couldn't find it through the fog of fatigue and expectation. Nights when press ate the story with teeth too sharp, and left him tired of having his heart summarized. Nights when the bracelet itched and his skin answered with an ache that had nothing to do with sweat. On those nights he returned to the tape of ocean, closed his eyes, and let the gulls remind him that music is just wave after wave trying to make it to shore. He returned to Wembley. It was years later and someone else's tour. He came alone on a day with no show, incognito in the way only the famous learn to be, and nodded at a security guard who had no idea he was granting passage to history. He walked the perimeter, fingers brushing the roughness of concrete, and found the bronze marker near the west gate. He stood long enough to be awkward. Then he smiled because awkwardness is just reverence without a dress on. He touched Emma's name on the plaque. The metal felt cool. The sun found a scratch he hadn't earned and made it shine anyway. "Hey, kid," he said softly. They remembered. He looked up at the empty seats and imagined them full. He imagined the lights rising and the hush falling, and the way a word can cut through noise if it has enough love in it. He imagined a mother starting to stand and a little girl's hand tightening, and a universe that pauses if you ask it kindly and mean it. He left by the same gate, unnoticed. On the way out, he took his glove off for a moment because he wanted his bare palm to hold the air like any other person who had ever stood on that ground. The bracelet pressed its remembered circle into his skin. That night, at a small rehearsal space with scuffed floors and scowling mirrors, he taught the band a new arrangement for the next run. The bridge of Man in the Mirror would now drop to a single voice and a single piano. "No click," he told them. "Let it breathe." The guitars frown out of habit at anything that threatens a grid. "How will we know when to come back in?" he asked. Michael smiled. "You'll hear them," he said. "They'll tell us." And they did. City after city, the pause widened to let the world sing. The choir was never rehearsed and always perfect because grief and hope know harmony by ear. He would step back from the mic and listen to the sound of thousands of people meaning the same sentence at the same time. It healed nothing and it healed everything. When the band returned, it was never because the count was right. It was because the moment had become a memory and the song had asked to be finished. Back in the dressing room after one of those shows, he sat alone for a second longer than usual. The din outside softened. He lifted his wrist to eye level and turned the bracelet so the knot showed. The colors had faded, red toward rose, blue toward sky, but the knot held. Whoever had taught small hands to tie it had done their job perfectly. "Look what you did," he told it. "Look what you started." He pictured a hospital window, and a girl's breath fogging it in the shape of a heart. He pictured a mother's hands learning to rest when rest was finally allowed. He pictured a father's laugh returning to his mouth like a bird to a fence. He stood and walked toward the stage door, because rooms are where you keep vows and stages are where you keep them alive. Just before he stepped through, he stopped, turned back, and placed a glove on the table for a moment so he could press the bracelet to his lips with both hands free. Then he picked up the glove, slid it on, and went to invite the world one more time to sing back. The years began to move differently. Tour buses turned into planes, and the planes into quiet rooms where the only audience was a man and the memory of sound. He still performed, still poured light out of his body the way a star spends itself. But the crowds had learned to sing the verses without him. That, he decided, was the point. When they could sing without him, the music had become theirs. The bracelet remained on his wrist. Managers begged him to take it off for photo sessions. Too worn, too simple, but he refused. "It's part of the costume now," he said and smiled. Only he knew it was the only piece of the costume that mattered. He wrote less about perfection and more about mercy. New songs came at odd hours, little sketches built around lullabies, around the way a heartbeat sounds when someone is listening instead of rushing. He produced other artists, the ones who still tremble when they sang, because he could see the thread of courage hiding under their fear. In interviews, he began saying things like music is a mirror we hold up to each other. Most people quoted the line without understanding he was thinking of a 9-year-old girl who had taught him that mirrors can shine in both directions. Fame changed shape. It stopped being a spotlight and became an echo. Sometimes it frightened him. Sometimes it comforted him. When the noise of the world grew too loud, he would walk alone through Neverland's gardens long after midnight, the animals asleep, the fountains whispering. He'd sit by the pond and dip the bracelet into the water, letting the moonlight catch it. "Still with me?" he'd ask the night. The wind would move through the trees like applause, answered softly. On his last tour, he insisted that every show end the same way. No fireworks, no final bow. The lights would fade until only the stage's edge remained visible, and he would step forward, remove one glove, and hold up his bare wrist. The camera zoomed close enough for the bracelet to fill the giant screens. He would whisper, "Love never dies," and walk off stage while the crowd sang the final chorus alone. It was his way of rehearsing eternity. He grew older. The world grew noisier. Headlines became crueler, the way storms get jealous of calm. Through every rumor, through every silence, the bracelet stayed. His assistants learned never to move it from the bedside table when he bathed. He would notice, always. Sometimes he'd take it between his fingers and say, "If a child could find courage, so can I." No one ever asked who the child was. They didn't need to. The night before he died, he rehearsed for hours. The band swore the energy felt like 1988 again. He stopped after Man in the Mirror, raised a hand, and said quietly, "That's the one we'll keep." He turned to the pianist. "Play it slower tomorrow. Let them sing first." The pianist nodded, not knowing that tomorrow would belong to silence. When the news broke, the world forgot how to breathe. Radio stopped their playlists and played Human Nature instead. Candlelight spread through cities as if grief itself were electrical. At Wembley, people gathered at the West Gate where the plaque already stood. Someone placed a single pink jacket beneath it. Someone else laid a child's white glove. By dawn, the bronze was hidden under flowers. Maria and Carlos watched the coverage from their apartment in Madrid. The screen showed helicopter shots of Neverland, the crowds, the tears. Maria touched the television's edge with her fingertips. "He kept his promise," she whispered. Carlos nodded. He danced until the end. A week later, a courier arrived with a package and a letter bearing the seal of MJJ Productions. Inside the box was a small cedar case, the same one that had lived beside his bed. The bracelet lay on top of a folded sheet of paper in his delicate handwriting. "Dear Maria and Carlos, if you're reading this, it means I've gone ahead to where the music never stops. Thank you for sharing Emma with me. She taught me that love can outsing fear. Keep her foundation alive. Keep finding impossible things waiting to be noticed. With all my heart, Michael. Maria pressed the paper to her chest. The tears that came were gentle this time, the kind that washed rather than wound. The foundation grew. People who had never met either of them, lawyers, nurses, musicians, began sending checks and instruments and weekends of their time. Concerts were held every year on the anniversary. No one charged admission. They passed a hat the size of the world and called it grace. Children who had been helped by the charity grew up and became doctors, teachers, sound engineers. They built smaller stages in hospitals, classrooms, refugee camps. The rule was always the same. If someone needs to dance, make space. In 2010, Wembley hosted a memorial concert called One More Song. The screen behind the stage showed footage from that night in 1988. The girl, the man, the impossible pause. Then the image faded, and the crowd itself took up the melody of Billie Jean, soft at first, then swelling until it became a river of harmony. There was no star on the stage, only light and memory. Reporters wrote that it felt as if two spirits had danced through the speakers and left footprints on the air. Time carried the story further. Documentary crews pieced together the details, showing clips of Maria describing the smell of the stadium, the way Michael's glove sparkled like a small galaxy, the sound of 65,000 strangers learning to whisper. Schools used the foundation's story in lessons about kindness. Pop stars quoted him at award shows. A researcher at a children's hospital in Sao Paulo named a new pediatric wing the Emma Wing because, as she said, hope needs a roof. Every July, the foundation released one scholarship. It wasn't for singing. It was for any young person who had turned compassion into action. The certificate read, for remembering that the show can wait. Decades later, a boy with headphones walked past the west gate of Wembley on his way home from school. He was 17, born long after both of them were gone. But the music in his ears was Man in the Mirror. He stopped when he saw people gathered around a bronze plaque half hidden by rain. Curious, he stepped closer and read the inscription. He'd heard of Michael Jackson, of course. Everyone had, but not of Emma Rodriguez. A woman beside him noticed his curiosity and said she was a little girl who made the world quiet. He looked at the flowers and the fading pink jacket someone had laid there that morning. Did he really stop a whole concert for her? The woman nodded. He did, and she danced. The boy smiled, slipped off his headphones, and listened to the echo of traffic and rain until, just for a moment, it sounded like applause. He took the small bracelet from his wrist, a cheap thing woven by a friend, and laid it among the flowers. For her, he said, and walked on. Far from there, in the archives of the foundation, a recording sits in a glass case. It is a rehearsal tape from Michael's final night. When the engineers cleaned the audio years later, they found something under the last note of Man in the Mirror, a faint second voice, a child's laughter. They played it over and over, trying to decide whether it was bleed from an old track or a miracle of acoustics. They finally stopped trying to explain it and labeled the file simply the dance that healed the world. Visitors listen through headphones, and when the laughter comes, light, sudden, unmistakable, they smile through their tears. Some look upward, some close their eyes, and the room fills with the silent rhythm of people remembering that once, for a few minutes, a song had held the whole world in its arms. The guide always ends the tour the same way. She points to a quote engraved on a wall beside the exit, a line taken from Michael's own notes for an unfinished song. The show must stop sometimes, so that love can go on. She tells them that's what he meant by legacy. And outside, the city keeps its own tempo, trains passing, children shouting, the hum of life refusing to end. Somewhere a radio plays Man in the Mirror, and a little girl, too young to know the story, hums along and spins once in the living room light, her socks sliding on the floor, her laughter ringing clear. The circle continues. The dance goes on, and the legacy, that beautiful collision of courage and kindness, never dies. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.